consultants at Neathouse Partners, and welcome to today's session. We're going to be running through absence management in this simple, easy to understand webinar. I'll be running through certain topics. We'll go through some stats because I think it's always important to understand where we currently are. Some of these stats are from the ONS, so are relatively accurate as of 2024. It may change. They may not be relevant to your business, but we'll look at them anyway because it sees it from a broader scale. We're going to look at employee assistance programs, the importance of those, where they can play a key role in managing absence. And maybe what I should say as well is that the webinar is called Absence Management, but the main focus is that bugbear that we all find is around the sickness side of things, because absence management could cover anything from parental leave, your holiday leave, AWOL, the new carers leave. But we're not going to focus on them because they're not what businesses need right now. And it's more around how we manage the absence with employees being sick. I'm going to look at some scary facts on that, on the number of employees being sick and kind of what that costs to a business. We'll look at the top tips on how we can manage that. And again, this is from a HR perspective. And sometimes people feel they don't have the time or they can't spend all those resources on it, but there are some quick hacks that are going to help you just to manage the situation, keep control of it so it doesn't get out of hand. We're going to look at discrimination, which is a whole different topic, whole other webinar that could go on for days. I've got one slide on it because it's just to touch it to make sure it's relevant with regards to absence and how we manage that. Then we're going to look at bits around our services. Naturally, I think 90% of attendees are actually clients of Neathouse, so you'll be pretty au fait with what our services are. But just to reignite that information on where we can help out and when is best to get us involved, when you can give us a call, and what we can do to support with that. And then lastly would be a roadmap for your success. And I think the timing of it is achievable if you want to put that effort in, where it looks through how we identify the problems, how we look at solving those problems, and where we come out the sunny side in order to make our absence management processes that bit stronger moving forward. And then there will be a Q&As at the end. There is a chat function. If you want to save questions till near the end, because they may or may not be answered through the course of the webinar, and then we can answer them there at the end with any time. Generally, we're going to take about 40 minutes. If I'm talking too fast, it may be that we run through it in 20 or not. I mean, it depends on the stats and how we look. So if we crack on with the first element of it, which is where we're currently at with sickness. So it's been on a crazy rise. Now, I originally put this slide together, and the second point about average sickness absence rate, I got from the ONS, which was from 2004, and it suggested that it was 7.2. But then a CIPD article that was made September of 25, so super relevant and new, suggests that absence rate has jumped to 9.4 days per employee per year, and that's sickness absence. So those are all those bits around a cold, a bad back, mental health issues. And it's shown a significant rise from where it was in 2024. Immediately, we start looking at ourselves and thinking, we're hiring the wrong people. We've got the wrong employees. They're taking too many sick days. If we're actually open and honest, it's about how do we manage that? How have we supported our employees to make sure that the level of sickness is kept to a minimum? And it goes into a whole different ball game of what our company culture looks like. Do we support our employees when they're off? Do they feel valued? Around all that is obviously the management side of things and having policies in place that are clear, that employees have access to so they know what the rules are and what shortfalls should they hit. Any triggers. I'm a big fan of absence triggers because it helps set clear boundaries on if you hit 3 absences within a 6-month period, it'll lead to a disciplinary. If it's 12 days of absence, because there's 3 occasions which is separate from 12 days, and the two caveats, one or the other, will hit a disciplinary. So it's crystal clear that they know how it's going to be managed moving forward. But we'll get onto that with top tips later on. As you can see on this slide, the average cost to the business, please don't be scared by this number. I've put 1,300 per employee per year, and it's in lost wages and work. Now, that figure is depicted by the fact that average salary in the UK is around 35, 36k, and based on 9.4 days of an employee being absent, you can quickly do the maths on that, that an average weekly pay of around 650, 9.4 days, means that if someone was out of the business, we're going to call it 2 weeks for the ease of talking about it. Someone's out of the business for 2 weeks, that's essentially £1,300 of wages that they're not doing their job for. If you quickly multiply that by 10 employees, it gets to a very scary figure. It's not the actual cost to the business, but it is those wages of someone that has been lost in them being sick from work. So if we move forward into some stats, now these are there for your purposes, again, around sickness related absences. It's from 2024. It's the most up to date we can get from the ONS at the minute. And it's not there to provide any subconscious bias, because we'll run through them and then you'll start thinking, all right, well, I'm going to only hire people in this demographic because they're the least sick. But it doesn't show a full picture of how those people are managed, what kind of industries they worked in. So we're going to look through, if we take the first slide. So I hope everyone can see that. It's come a little bit fuzzy for mine, but the first one is around sickness absence rate, and it's higher for part-time workers. So not a lot of people will be aware of that. And if we take that as a whole, part-time workers generally doing 2 or 3 days are there because that works right for them and they're not that interested. Does it incorporate a lot of the younger dynamic that are doing a job while they're studying, and then sickness rises because they're not that interested, they don't have bills to pay, it's all disposable income for them? And that's where a graph can show one thing around part-time workers as opposed to full-time workers, but what does it look like in reality? And what does it look like for you as a business? And is that true within your business? Do you have a lot of part-time workers? And are those part-time workers taking more sick leave than full-time workers? And of course, if you work out a percentage, if someone works 2 days a week and they're off 1 day, that's 50% of their working week. Whereas if someone works 5 days and they're off 1 day, that's only 20% of their working week. So you can quickly see how figures can be skewed, and it's important for you to keep tabs of what's happening within your business in order to manage it effectively. Now, minor illnesses have always been on the trend as the highest reason for sickness absences, and this includes stomach bug, colds, flus, anything within that. And you can see that that is the first bar graph on that second slide, or second graph, where it's always been the highest, kind of always will be. And what you'll see as well is that the mental health one, which I believe is the darker blue under other, had a spike around COVID time, and naturally that kind of tailed off. No, sorry, excuse me, mental health is the darker green one, which again still follows that pattern where it had the spike and now it's tailed off, but still a cause for concern. And I believe anyone on this call will see that they've had some run-in with an employee that has come out with mental health, and it's how we evolve and manage that. A quick history story is like back in the 90s, it was a bad back, and that was the fashionable trend for people being sick. Everyone kind of had a bad back. And in the days prior to emails and mobile phones and easy connection, it was a common myth that employees would be off with a bad back and then say, you can't ring me, because if you ring me on my landline, I have to get up with my bad back and I have to go down and answer the old school dinosaur phone. And that's causing me great concern. Please don't ring me. Here's my sick note for 4 weeks. I'll be back then. And that was kind of commonly accepted. Now move forward into today, and we find miraculously nobody has a bad back anymore. It seems to have dissipated from 1990s. But what we are finding is an increased trend in people with mental health illnesses. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not to say that I don't believe that there are mental health illnesses and people have stress and anxiety, but they were always there. People in the 90s and the 2000s, they still had those issues. It's just now how we adapt as businesses, seeing the trend and how we can manage that in the same way that we manage the back pain of 1990s, and now we're on to a different challenge. And looking at trends and looking at your own business sees where those key dynamics need addressing. If mental health is one of them, we're going to touch on employee assistance programs, which seem to be becoming increasingly popular and something that we really need to take note of as it's the evolution of how things go. On this following slide, it goes into the occupation of where people work. So you can see clearly how it is increased in different industries. Now, it might not be true for your actual industry, but it's worth noting and seeing where there's a benchmark, because that's really what these figures are. It's not to take them and think, right, I need to do some work on this because I was employing more part-time than full-time, and they have a history of being more sick. I was employed more men than women, and men are off less sick according to this. But again, a picture says 1,000 words, but it's looking into the detail of how that impacts you. Because if we look at the women's sickness absence rate, higher than men's in all age groups in 2024. That may be true from the ONS stats, but what does that mean to you? If you have an industry that is predominantly female, and then there are complications, it's, well, are we doing enough to support them? Do our policies reflect what we need to do to support those women? Are our family friendly policies right for where they need to be? I.e., do we have sufficient maternity leave cover, parental leave? Because families can take up to 4 weeks per year for a maximum of 18 weeks for any child up until the age of that child being 18. So at any given point, I have kids, and I could turn around to my employer and ask for a week of unpaid leave in January because I feel I'm not spending enough time with my kids. And that's a justified reason from my perspective. And the employee has to look at it and think, right, well, we can facilitate that. That still falls into absence. It's not sickness absence, but it is another variation where employees need to be supported in those ways. And you find that the common trend is women tend to have more caring duties, even now in today's day and age. So it's being mindful of that. It's not creating an unconscious bias and looking at this slide and thinking, right, men between the ages of 35 to 49 seem to have the least amount of sickness. So now my recruitment policies, I'm only going to hire men of that age. That's discrimination, and that can't be done. But it's looking at your industry as a whole and where you can support the sickness absences, which we'll get onto the top tips and who it refers to. So moving on with the sickness absence rate, and it continues to fall. The kind of blip in the orange, where it suggested that it's been falling because HR has come to the forefront of how we manage it. And I think as a whole, it's been a hot topic for quite a while because it is lost money, as we showed in the first slide. But as it's been dipping, obviously COVID took over, unprecedented. Nobody knew how to deal with it. It was an ongoing dynamic situation. It saw a massive spike. It's now kind of retracting a little bit. It suggests that it's kind of had a rise again in 2025, and we need to look at ourselves on how we manage those situations and what that looks like, and how best we look at what affects us, because we will never get rid, or so far, I don't know how technology is moving on, but we will never get rid of the common cold or flu, and they happen year on year, and there's nothing we can do about that. But would a common cold and a flu equate to the 9.4 days of sickness that we saw on the first slide, that not every employee, sorry, the average employee is taking across a year? I don't think somebody would have cold and flu for 9 days within the year. So it's how we manage those other ones to make those little incremental gains. And that's where we move on to the evolution and things like an employee assistance program. So if we look at the employee assistance program as a whole, I took this slide where it explains why people have employee assistance programs. I understand it is an additional cost to a business because you have to have an external provider that is going to be qualified, and this is the kind of USPs on how they sell it. But if you look at the cost to a business of every time someone's off sick, now the £1,300 is those 9.4 days of when they're off. But look at the time from a manager trying to chase around finding cover, or speaking to the employee that's off sick to find out why they're off sick, then waiting to see if they come in the following day, and do you have to find cover for that? Do you have to go out and outsource cover by getting agency workers in at a significant higher cost than what it was? Do you run on less employees that day because someone's called in sick, then putting pressure on other employees that may or may not constitute in them being sick? And there's all these additional ramifications of time and resources. And if you boil it all down, you could turn around and think, right, I've got an employee assistance program. It's costing me £500 a year. But it doesn't just help with one employee that's potentially costing me 1,300. It's helping with all my employees, and I've got 20 of them. And if I was to reduce the absence from where it currently is on an average of 9.4 days, and I reduce it to 8.4 days, then the employee assistance program has actually saved me money, and it's cost me a lot less, and the cost effectiveness works out for the business in the long run. Now, where we come in is that we partner with corporate wellbeing solutions. And again, it's around having that bond where we as advisors, we speak to our clients, and if they need an occupational health referral, we go to corporate wellbeing solutions. And that's purely because it's effective for us in managing or helping clients manage what's going on with the employee sickness. And we get responses in a timely manner. We have the forms to send out. It's someone that we know and trust, and it helps speed the process along rather than an external employee assistance program and the client goes for a occupational health referral through them. We have no sight of that process, so it's very difficult for us to help manage and advise you on next steps when you're saying, yeah, I've sent off the consent form, they've said that they're doing an occupational health referral, it's going to be 2 weeks. And you're like, well, we may have lost impetus at that point. The employee might be back. There are so many changes that can happen between now and then. So that's hence why we would recognize that if you come with corporate wellbeing solutions, we can get answers. Generally, I wouldn't want to put them under pressure and say that it will be done within kind of a week, but they are generally very timely. And that helps us in managing the employee, the sickness, and the expectations. But the employee assistance program on the whole does give employees access to kind of 6 counselling sessions. And that's giving them an option of someone they can speak to outside of the workplace. Because you'll generally find all our policies around poor behaviour, poor performance, grievances, is the first stage is to informally talk with your manager. Now, if everyone is so busy within the organization that there's never a moment to find the time to speak to that manager or to tie them down and speak to them in a confidential way or have a meeting somewhere, then they've got the option of speaking to someone else external. And that can help build the support and the trust from the employee that we've provided that. And it's something additional by an external that's available for them for their mental health issues, for financial struggles. Everyone's going through the cost of living crisis, and maybe they just need someone to speak to because they don't have that family support. And having it in place is mitigating for us should there be employee issues. We've said there's an employee assistance program, and this can help you manage what you're going through. Please let me know if you want to engage with it. And it shows us, and it will come up in part of the top tips in the next slide, on what we've done to help the employee to mitigate against the numbers of sickness days that they're having, which again saves cost, time, resources for the business as a whole. So if we look at top tips, these are made by me, and it's because I feel as an advisor, these are always the questions that I ask clients and look for not only the answers, but prove it, show me, what have you got? Keeping records of sick leave data, it sounds common sense, but a lot of people still work on someone's been off sick. We've done a kind of return to work meeting where on the first day back, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. Are you happy to return to work? Yeah. What was wrong with you? I had a cold. Okay, brill. Off you pop, back to your desk. There's no record of that. And that's where, if you've got a system in place, we work through Evaluate, another partner of ours. But whatever you've got, you need to be putting in very accurately when someone is off sick and keeping tabs of it. And that's not just for the second point of having trigger points because they set clear expectations, but it's knowing, because one of my questions is, oh, I've got this client, this employee, they've been off sick kind of 4 or 5 times. Okay, is it 4 or is it 5? Oh, I think it's around 4 or 5. Right, what have you got to prove when they're off sick, how long they were off sick for? Is it 4 or 5 times within a space of 2 years? Is it 4 or 5 times within a space of 2 months? When were they employed? And it's all that data that you need to have in order to help you or us when we're advising to manage the next steps, because it provides context to everything that's going on. Now, I am a massive believer in trigger points. And for those that don't know trigger points, it's where you have an absence policy and it says you have to phone in an hour before you start your shift, and you need to let your manager know. It has to be a phone call, not a text, not an email, so we can speak to you. And then within that absence policy, it clearly identifies a set amount of occasions someone is allowed to be sick before it raises concerns. So if I just spitball an idea of 3 absence instances in a 6-month period, or 10 absence days in a 6-month period. So then anyone that is off throughout October, from now they have a sick day on the 9th, they have another sick day at the end of October, and then they have another sick day in November. They've then hit that trigger point because they've had 3 within a 6-month period. And then that trigger point hits a disciplinary procedure. Now, a disciplinary procedure is to sit down and discuss their absence levels and the fact that it can't be sustained by the business because it's costing money. And we want to make sure that our employees are all fit and healthy. So we look at that objectively. It's not to say that the disciplinary will actually come out with a written warning, although the likelihood is that those are the rules, those are the expectations, you've not met them, and therefore we're going to manage it as we should and as we would with everyone. So identifying those patterns, if and when they happen, setting the expectations, there could be no grey area for employees saying, why am I getting a disciplinary? We say, well, it's a trigger point. It's part of our policy. It's crystal clear that it's written down that that's how we're going to manage things, and you've exceeded it. Now we'll touch on the discrimination side of things and how we look at equality over equity when dealing with those situations. But then it's about, again, managing the expectation. As it says, we set the expectation, we monitor it. Where you hit it, it creates repercussions. Now, one thing that a lot of clients ask is, am I allowed to phone my employee while they're off sick? They've said they're off with mental health. I can't possibly phone them if they're saying they're not well. I was like, well, that's kind of a myth, because how can you just leave someone who's suffering with mental health and not show your support to them? Surely that's more detrimental than giving them a call. Generally, when I get that query, I would tell a client that best practice is, if you have a preferred communication method and it is email or a WhatsApp, utilize that first to say, hey, Joe Blogs, I'm really sorry you're off sick at the minute. I wanted to have a phone catch up. How is tomorrow, 12 p.m. for you? If it's not convenient, let me know an alternative time, because I just want to check in on you, make sure you're all right. Because the last thing you want to do is phone someone out of the blue. We've all had it. You get a phone call, you open up your mobile, it's a random number, and you're like, I don't know who that is. I'm not answering that. And you put it down. Employees would be the same, especially if they're suffering, that they pick up the phone, they see it's their employer, and then like, oh my God, what do they want? What could they possibly need? Why are they harassing me out of the blue? Whereas you've kind of taken that away by sending it via an email that they can read in their own leisure, and they've got time to formulate a response or to get back to you, at which point you've supported them. And from a HR point of view, you've also evidenced it, because it's gone in an email that has been date stamped, and it lets them have that adequate time for you to then arrange a welfare call and to see how they're doing. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The return to work interviews are fundamental. These are when someone's been off, they come back into the workplace, and you ask them a kind of series of questions. What were you off sick with? How are you now? Are you fully fit to return to work? And again, this is the mitigation that we have shown support to the employee, and we've made sure that they are fine to return to their full duties, at which point we're still managing that expectation. So that one's a simple one, simple form to use. And I would suggest it's used every time someone's off sick, every time, regardless of what it's for, because it just gets the right culture within the workplace, that's how we manage things for everyone. So it's always fair, everyone gets the same treatment, and we file them away, and it's part of our keeping records, the first point. Then on our next point is training managers, obviously, for early intervention. This one's key, but some of it is a case of reading up on our policies, which ties in with our next point about keeping clear absence policies. If you don't want trigger points, don't have trigger points. It's a preference of mine that I used to have when line managing people. Some people think that it's not befitting within the culture of their company. Absolutely fine. But make sure your absence policies are clear. Some are very, for want of a better word, blasé, in the long-term sickness. We will support you, and you'll be on SSP, and you need to provide sick notes. That's not quite clear enough for the expectations that we want from the employee on how they are to be in touch. Long-term sickness generally is 4 weeks or more. So it's looking at that, identifying what can we do before the 4 weeks, because it goes back to training managers for early intervention. I remember reading some stat that if you engage with employees within the first week, you're more likely to see a return within the coming 2 weeks rather than not engaging at all. The employee is left at home thinking they're unsupported, and then the absence reaches that long-term sickness, and then we think, right, what can we do about it? Clear policies help you manage those situations, help employees know when you're going to be in touch, let them know about their responsibilities and obligations of when they need to be in touch, when sick notes need to be submitted. They can self-certify for a week. Then after that, they need a doctor's note. And then it's important to identify if reasonable adjustments are required. If someone is suffering from a disability, is it a learning disability and we need to look at the different softwares that we use in order to support them? Is it a physical disability that someone's just had a broken leg and the office is on the second floor and there's no lift? Can they work from home? Have we got some flexible options where we create the reasonable adjustments, provide them with a laptop and say, you can work from home for 8 weeks until your leg is mended and you can make it up and downstairs? Simple things, but we don't know unless we communicate with our employees. So on the next bit, it's around avoiding discrimination. Granted, there's a lot of writing on the slide, but essentially it's one to be touched upon because it seems to be becoming more and more apparent that people are off with various sicknesses, and generally we see it a lot with employees that have less than 2 years service, so therefore can't make a claim for unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal because they're short service, as it's known. So then in order to make a claim, they would tag the reasons for making a claim to some sort of protective characteristic. It's because of my race, my colour, my disability, and all the rest. And sometimes they do have justified reasons for it, absolutely, but sometimes they don't. And that is where they try and assert that reasonable adjustments haven't been made. I've been off sick for 3 months with a mental health issue. You're like, well, that's awful. If we followed the previous steps and we had early intervention, we had welfare calls, we signposted them to employee assistance programs, we arranged times to discuss with them on any reasonable adjustments we can make to get them back into the workplace, and we've covered ourselves in paperwork, we're doing everything we can to support them. So then if it does come to a dismissal for medical capability, then we've avoided the discrimination because there's no more support we can give. Not to mention the fact that 3 months with mental health would not necessarily be classed as a disability, because generally a disability within the Equality Act is defined as someone that has a long-standing, which is generally 12 months or more, issue that has impacted the daily life for that longevity. So 3 months doesn't meet the 12-month criteria, but what we do need to explore is, have they had previous mental health? Did they have an absence of 2 months a year ago for mental health, stress, anxiety? Was it that this employee used to be in the armed forces and did a tour of Iraq and has PTSD? It was submitted on the medical questionnaire prior to starting, so we know about it. And now it's come out that they're sick for 3 months. Well, that's possibly covered under the Equality Act because it's something that we've known about. And just because they haven't been off sick with it in the 3 years that they've been employed, but now they have, we've known about it all along. And it's now how we manage to support that person to get them back. And this is where it's really important with sick days. So I'll put an example. If a disabled employee might need to take time off work for medical treatment or for sickness in general, their absence levels could be higher. And this falls into equality and equity are not the same. So equality is that we have those famous trigger points, and it's 3 absences and then you're hitting a disciplinary. That is equality. I've put it down in a policy. That's how everyone's going to be managed. Equity is that not every employee is the same, and sometimes a policy needs to be amended. So there's 3 trigger points, and that's how everyone's going to be treated. But we need to make reasonable adjustments by law for someone that has a disability. So part of our reasonable adjustments might be that if that person has hit 3 trigger points, they've been off 3 times, we sit down with them, we do a return to work, and as part of that return to work, we say, do you know you've hit our absence management policy and you've had 3 absences, which should lead to a disciplinary? But we want to make it fair, and we understand that maybe you require more time off to deal with whatever you're going through. So what about if we make a different trigger point just for you, and we put 5 in a 6-month period? And you get the engagement from the employee on what they need and what they want and what would work for them. And that is the equity side of things, that you're making adjustments, because policies are there as guidelines. They're not the absolute be all and end all. They can be altered as we need, because that is the fairness of how we deal with different employees in different situations, because anyone's absence, any employee, as you know, as people, are all completely different. They all have different needs. Making sure that everyone falls in line with what we need and we set those expectations makes it manageable, but we may need to change. So avoiding discrimination is key. It's especially key with employees less than 2 years. You cannot dismiss someone because of their absence levels that are related to a disability. So making sure that, you absolutely can. You can dismiss someone at any point, but in order to avoid any discrimination, there are other steps you need to make, like the reasonable adjustments. So part of it could be that you record some types of absences separately. Another one falls around pregnancy. We know that when women are pregnant, they have another life form growing inside of them. They have morning sickness, and inevitably they will be more sick than someone else who's fully fit, nothing wrong with them per se. And you need to manage that you couldn't have someone that's pregnant go into a trimester of the morning sickness, have 3 days, and then automatically say, right, you've hit a trigger point, let's go to a disciplinary. Because they'll just turn around and say, well, my sickness is related to my pregnancy, which is a protective characteristic. So no, we won't be going to a disciplinary because that's unfair. And they'd be absolutely right. So it's about adjusting those trigger points for the specific needs. Now, people would say you can't manage me or manage my sickness because of my pregnancy. Again, it's another myth. We're still going to record the absences. We're not going to ignore them, but it gives us a kind of foundation. If we stick on the topic of pregnancy, and we've had 3 pregnant ladies over the space of 2 years, and the first one had an average of 3 days of sickness. The second one had an average of 6 days sickness, and the third one had 5 days sickness. We can use that data. It's powerful stuff that we then incorporate another one where we feel that on average 5 days of sickness should be the adjusted trigger point for people that are pregnant. And we're going to put that in and factor that in when we have a return to work with them and say, we found in the past that an additional 5 days works. Naturally, we're not going to come down on you like a ton of bricks if you take 6 days off. But we're saying this is the expectation based on historical data. It's not to say it will always work, but it just means that you're in tune with everything and you're making the adjustments required in order to manage the situation. Because if someone's off sick regularly on a Friday, showing a pattern, and they're pregnant, I don't think that morning sickness or any sort of sickness, mental health, cold and flu, bad back, would always fall on a Friday. And if it shows a clear pattern, then that's something to be managed, because that sits outside of, well, I'm being reasonable, I've made my adjustments, but yet I find it hard to believe that you're off every Friday. Why is that? And pull them in and have the conversation about it. Get occupational health involved. You don't have to wait till they're actually off sick long term for 4 weeks. You just say, well, it's got to a point now where we need to seek that medical advice, and we're going to get an occupational referral to understand why, like clockwork, every Friday you're off sick. So I hope that helps manage those expectations. Longer than I wanted to on that slide, because discrimination is a whole different ball game. But regarding absence, it can be managed as long as we keep the data. So we fall into our services, and many of you will be up to date with these and what we provide, but it goes into the policies and making sure that there are clear policies and we set the expectations, there's no grey areas, and people know how they're going to be managed, where any trigger points are, or what communication we are going to require from them while they're off. So you can utilize Neathouse Partners by giving us a shout and saying, can you review this policy on absence management? Because I was at this great webinar with Ciaron and he told me that my policies need to be up to date and I want to know, am I liable for anything here? Is my long-term sickness strong enough that it just says, we'll give you a call? That doesn't help manage it. It doesn't let the employee know when that call is going to happen, what welfare meeting is going to happen, when are we going to kick in with occupational health referral. So having it crystal clear. Then it falls into the communication side of things. Now, that can be put in a policy. That can be guidelines within there to say, if you're off sick for a week and you've self-certified, we're going to call you on the 7th day or 5th day if it's a 5-day working week, because we want to check that you're okay and whether you need to go back to the doctor and you're going to provide a sick note. And we're also going to make you aware, as part of our supportive measures, that your self-certification is up for that week. So moving forward, if you're not returning to work Monday, for example, you will need a doctor's note. And then we may instruct occupational health to get our own independent assessment on what we can do as a workplace to make it better. But you have to have that open dialogue. If an employee is being difficult and saying, no, you can't call me, I'm off with mental health, you're not allowed to phone me. Well, yes, we are. We still have an employer-employee relationship. How can I support you? How can I help you? How can I facilitate a return to work if I can't talk to you? Because all of a sudden, the employee is turning that situation from absence into a conduct. How can you say I cannot be in touch with you? That's ridiculous. We'll arrange a time that's suitable for you, but it's definitely something that we are going to do. You can't ignore a situation and pretend it's going to go away. Then it moves on to technology. Great one. I am a great believer that if you have the right technology that you require, and this comes in all different shapes and forms, but you need technology to keep note of everything that's happening, to manage the absence easier, to have it date stamp and recorded, rather than having a list of streams and streams of paper that are in HR files. If anyone still uses filing cabinets and has HR files, we kind of need to move forward with the technology and having it stored somewhere in files on the computer, easily accessible. Then when you phone me up for some sort of advice on how we're managing something, I'll say, have you got return to work? And you're like, yeah, they're in this client folder. Here's my employees' details. Here's their contract. Here's their absence management. Here's their return to works. Let me send it all across to you. Brilliant. Easy to use. It can easily stand out showing patterns where you've got absence reporting within a technology software platform, and you can clearly see they've been absent Friday of payday for the last 3 paydays. And you're like, okay, that's showing kind of a pattern. Let's nip this in the bud, because we don't want it to continue as such, and we want the employee to know that we're aware of it. Then an outcome. It's about being fair, treating people equally, apart from the previously mentioned where you do have to make reasonable adjustments. And when you are talking this through with us, because it's very difficult to manage absence within a webinar because every situation is different and completely bespoke, but we look for the outcome that you want, and we identify the steps that are maybe required in order for you to get to the outcome you want, while keeping you legally safe and compliant with your obligations. But there'll also be situations, and it does happen, where clients say to me, well, I can't sustain this anymore. I need to get rid of this employee as soon as possible. There's always a commercial option, and you always have a way of alleviating them from employment sooner rather than following the right steps. But it does open you up for risk of a tribunal claim. Now, if you're happy with that level of risk, the choice is always yours. You're the employer, you're the one that employs those people, so you take it as you want. If the person, in your opinion, is never going to make a tribunal claim, they're less than 2 years service, and they've been off sick for 4 months, and you just want to dismiss them there and then, you could do a short service dismissal. We will help and we'll support that. We'll potentially not advise it. It's an option, and it will be put down as one of the options, and it's very commercial. I want to dismiss them and I want it today, ready to impact tomorrow. You can do it. Have you done enough? Because we'll always say, well, what can you show me? Have they got protective characteristics? What have you done to showcase that you've looked after them, had welfare calls, got occupational health involved because of long-term sickness? What conversations have you had? Because otherwise, we're not mitigating against a potential discrimination because we haven't found out that information, and that's where the data is key. But we always work towards the outcome that you want because you are the client, and we just try and navigate it as safely as possible, which is why you have us on board. Now, a roadmap. Now, this I put together. I feel it's realistic for majority of clients that are SMEs. Naturally, if you have a company of 1,000 employees, then maybe this prolongs this roadmap. But what you hopefully are going to do after this webinar is take stock of the current reality of where your sickness absence levels are. And that goes back to, have you got the data set to look at it? Have you got the technology that helps you manage that? Have you got return to works? Have you got paperwork and all the rest? But looking objectively, this is where we're currently at with our sickness. Ciaron scared the hell out of me by saying that 9.4 days is the average that every employee is off. But our current reality is that we've averaged 5 days. And then that's great. You know, we're below the average, brilliant. But then it's about those incremental improvements. So it's identifying what good looks like for you once you've identified where your starting point is. And if it's 5 days in this example, and you want to half that, and you want to get it to 2-3 days, then good for me looks like in the next 6 months, we are going to get our 5 days average absence per employee for sickness down to 3. Then it's about what you can implement and looking back at the policies. If I haven't said the word policies enough, maybe it's kind of hitting home to you that they are important. Having to know where we're going to manage those absences, getting in touch with us, we can help redraft an absence policy or to make it more stringent so that it's crystal clear. And the more information you get, I tried to put a slide in that identified where the most absences are. And there was nothing up to date for 24 or 25, but there was a common theme around cold and flu and mental health being on the rise. Surgery was surprisingly quite high as well. I think I've taken stock of what it was. Childcare issues, another one on the rise as an absence. So it's looking at the policies that support them and how it's managed. So if you have data sets on which absence impacts you the most, is it those short-term ones, at which point they can be managed quite easily by the trigger points? Or is it more longer term situations, at which point we need to get employee assistance programs involved, occupational health referrals, all those other bits? But until you know where the problem lies, you can't start to fix it. So then I've put through that if we start from now, October, we go back, we look and we identify the problem, we see what good looks like, we put a plan in place on where we want to get it to and what is acceptable levels of absence. You get in touch with us at Neathouse and you tell us this is what we need to do, this is the plan moving forward, and this is the time frame of how we're going to start managing it, that we want to make a change to our non-contractual handbook on our absence management policy and how we're going to start to manage it better to reduce the sickness level absences. And then come 2026, which is around the corner, we start to reduce it. Now, if you can see on the slide, it says save costs of circa £640 per employee per year. I understand that that is contradictory to the first one. The first slide was put in there at 1,300 just as a scaremongering one to let you know average wages per year, 9.4 days, equates to that in lost business. But as a real figure, if we break down 2 weeks of sickness, someone would be off, and we're just going to take it in its simplicity that it's 2 weeks in a block. The first 3 days go unpaid because they're classed as waiting days, so there's no entitlement to statutory sick pay. Watch this space because that might change with the reforms that may or may not be coming in April. But currently, there's no pay for the first 3 days. Then they're paid statutory sick pay at a current rate of £118.75 per week for any subsequent week up to a maximum of 28 weeks. So that means that for the back end of that week, they get paid 2 days of that. And then the following week, they get that week of SSP. So it equates to around £160 in SSP. But then you also need to find cover for those people that aren't in work, and that has a real cost, and that's been averaged at potentially a week, because once you've been hit with a sick note, that's when you know that they are signed off for a week, because a self-certification, they could come back at any point and there's no actual documentation for it. Whereas if they go and they get a doctor's sick note and they're off for another week, then that's where you look at planning and making the cover that you need moving forward. So as an actual real life cost to the business, it's generally £640 per employee per year. Now, you could probably get an employee assistance program that would cover that. And if you scale those absences back, as previously suggested, then it's paid for itself. And it is really worthwhile having a look at that and seeing how you can be better at managing these things moving forward to get less sickness absence management. So with all that said, I will now take a breath and we move on to any questions. Please use the chat feature. I have Sol, my compatriot, who will be posting them through. I see his chats are coming up as and when. Sol, do we have any questions? I've seen one, contact Craig. Yeah, for bespoke ones, it's very difficult for me to help answer those on a webinar because it could be 100 different people coming up with 100 different scenarios, and each one is bespoke, as we've said. So please feel free to get in touch, speak to your advisor. We'll talk you through it. We'll discuss the points. If there's anything that I've raised that raises more questions, we're always on hand to answer them. Just let us know. I see Sol has been providing answers as we go. Just running through the chat to see what there is. So there's one about how to explore EAP from Nicola. Thank you. Yeah, phone number is on this last slide with our email address to get in touch. We'll absolutely put you in touch with the right people. People saying they'll speak to the clients, to their advisors. Fantastic. Claire with a great question around, I mentioned disciplinary after 3 absences. Again, mine was an example. It doesn't have to be 3 absences within that period. You can set your own trigger points. It might be 6 absences in 6 months. It's however you want to manage it. It might be no trigger points because, as I said, it's not befitting to the culture of your company and you don't want to do that. And if someone's away with ill health, we did mention on how we're looking at supporting that. Now, people that have a disability or ill health or mental health issues, whatever it looks like, it doesn't mean that we have to keep them employed when their sickness levels are not sustainable to the company. We are a small SME. We have 10 employees and one of them is suffering from mental health. We want to show how we can support them, make the reasonable adjustments to facilitate their attendance in work as much as possible. at a certain point, you've exhausted all your reasonable adjustments and there is nothing further you can do. You have created a phased return to work. You have given them less hours. You have restricted their duties to the less stressful elements of their role that they have suggested are causing them stress. And you've looked at all those parts. They've all been reasonably adopted. The employee still goes off sick, and you pick up a call to your advisor and you say, look, these are all the reasonable adjustments we've done. I know we have to make reasonable adjustments by law. We've done all these and they're still not coming back to work. What can I do? Okay, let's look at an occupational health assessment to see if they come up with anything else, because they are a medical professional that's going to understand whether there are anything else that hasn't been mentioned to the employer that we could potentially do. Failing all reasonable adjustments, you may have to start look at a medical capability procedure, which could end up in a medical capability termination, because the company is suffering, paying out £118.75 on a weekly basis for the SSP for someone not being in work, and it's creating disruptions and we have to find cover and all the rest. It needs to be fair, it needs to be non-discriminatory, and it needs to fulfill certain obligations of making reasonable adjustments. So hopefully that answers your question. Gina said the biggest reason is a child being poorly, not going to school. Is there anything we could do to help manage this? Absolutely. This is brilliant, because most people are parents. No, that's not right. Half of people generally are parents within the workplace. And again, it's that word, it's the policies. It's having the family-friendly policies that we haven't really touched on here, but having it suggested that if your child is sick, we get it. I'm a parent. I would go running if I got a call from the school to say, my child's not well, can you come pick him up? Absolutely. But it still needs to be managed. So it falls into that category where I spoke about the pregnancy and the disability one. It's about the equity side of things. And we have 10 employees, and between these 10 employees, one of them has one child, one of them has 5 children. The one with 5 children is a single parent, and the one with one child is with the partners are both together and they have a family structure around them. You have to take each one on its individual merits, but setting clear boundaries and saying, look, Joe Bloggs, you've been taking off quite a bit of absence for your child and your child being sick. What family support have you got around you? Have you got a partner that can pick them up? Have you got parents that can help sort it out? Because we're monitoring this absence, and I want to let you know that so far this year you've had X amount. Moving forward, if there is another Y amount, it may lead to disciplinary. You've addressed the problem, you've set the expectation, and you've told them what the consequences are going to be if there's no improvement, while of course being sympathetic to their individual needs. If it is a single mum of 5 kids, both the mother's parents have passed away and she literally has no other support, you have to be sensitive around that and make something a little bit more bespoke for her. But hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully disciplinary procedure related to sickness absence has been answered. Question from Aaron. Do you think there's a pattern trend that reduces absence through employee agreed flexible working options? Whole different ballgame there with flexible working. How are they managed when they are working from home? And again, it depends on the type of work you do. Are there certain KPIs that you can put in that suggest when you're in the office, you tend to send out 20 emails and make 3 quotes for clients. When you're at home, you tend to send out 6 emails and 1 quote. And if you can clearly see that there are patterns between someone working from home, someone working flexibly, then that falls into a conduct thing. Not necessarily absence, but flexible working can tie in with reductions in absence. That if you have that availability, that people can work from home, it may stop them from calling in sick. I myself, today I'm at home, and if at any point I am not well enough to travel into the workplace, or I don't want to spread my germs with everyone else in the workplace, then I have a process to follow. I phone my boss and I say, I'm not feeling well today, but it's more of a tickly throat kind of cold thing. I'm still absolutely fine to do my job, so it's not a sickness per se, but I just don't feel like traveling into work. Is it okay if I work from home? They make that adjustment and say, absolutely, work from home. That stops an absence. So brilliant. They've managed it in an appropriate way. Scrolling down, trigger points, return to work procedure includes 0-hour employees, bank staff. If you have an employee, no matter what their contract is, 0-hour contract, bank staff, some of it falls into a different procedure where with bank staff, I would suggest, again, policies. You're going to get sick of that word. If they turn down work so many times, that may lead to a disciplinary, because there's no point having someone on the books. You offer them work, they have no obligation to take it, but if they turn down work 2, 3, 5, whatever you set the parameters at, then absolutely that can be a different sort of trigger point that then moves towards a disciplinary, because they're not accepting the work. So what's the point in keeping them on the books? As far as 0-hour staff, that's slightly different and depends on the contract. So seek advice from your advisor on that. But if they've got a 0-hour contract, then generally, if you offer them hours and you put them on a rota and it's done in advance, they have to take them. So then if they're not turning up for them, then that is through absence management. And absolutely, return to works, covers yourself in documents, and creates the evidence that you need to move forward to a disciplinary. Another question for Claire. How do you offset the higher risk of presenteeism and burnout with that kind of policy where you have only 3 instances, 12 days as a trigger? So again, Claire, it goes back to what works for you. Anything can be put in a policy. You can put 20 days in a year, 20 occasions of absence in a year hits a trigger point. It's kind of pointless on the management side of things because it would be very difficult for someone to hit 20 in a year, but it's entirely up to you. Some people operate with company enhanced sick pay. Now, my personal view, and it's absolutely personal, and if you speak to me as your advisor, I wouldn't be saying this because it's down to you and how you run your business. But I think that company sick pay almost rewards people for being off sick. And I understand the ethos of it is to support them while they're off. But we find time and time again, people will be off for exactly the amount of company full pay that they get and then miraculously not sick again. So how do you stop the burnout, presenteeism, flexible working? Do you offer additional pay in some circumstances? Do you change your trigger points? Do you have well-being days? Do you have enhanced holiday beyond a statutory 5.6 weeks? Do you have the right family leave that's available? Carers leave, parental leave? Do you just have additional leave for anyone else that isn't a parent, because we don't want to discriminate and want to treat them similarly? That should you want to take a week of unpaid leave, we have that in a separate policy that's available to stop burnout and to make sure that you're well in your work. Are people going to take us up on an unpaid week of leave? Possibly not, depending on their circumstances. But it's another way of stopping that burnout by saying you've got 5.6 weeks of holiday leave and that's paid. If you want another week unpaid, that's available. So you don't have to, I don't want to say manufacture a sickness or be sick through a burnout, because it does happen, but offering other parts that would stop it from being a sickness. But then is that just skewing your figures onto something else, and it's something else for you to manage, and it's another process? If you're happy doing that, it could be a great way of showing employees that you're there to support them in other ways. But yeah, it's quite bespoke. If you do have a high level of burnout, then I suggest absolutely get in touch with us, because it depends on the work that they're doing and how many hours they do within a week and all the rest of it. It's definitely one to get advice from an advisor. Question from Nigel. What advice would you offer on pre-employment checks relating to sickness and medical related matters? I would suggest that pre-employment checks, we don't touch it on medical related matters, because you would generally have to have a box in there that would say that they don't wish to disclose, at which point it skews those figures anyway. And it generally opens up a risk that doesn't need to be there, because if you have a pre-employment medical questionnaire, and again, forgive me, because it depends on the size of the business and how it works and what you're looking at and what the reasons for it are, because factory settings may require it as opposed to office based. But if it's a pre-employment one and you ask them about their medical information and they disclose that they have a disability of some sort and they end up not getting the role, without good feedback, and again, a good process that's robust on giving feedback for why they didn't get the role that is nothing to do with the pre-employment medical questionnaire, people can rightly or wrongly assert, I didn't get that role because I put on a pre-employment medical questionnaire that I have a disability. They have discriminated against me. Why open yourself up to that risk and have a questionnaire if it's not really relevant for the best person for the role? Hopefully that answers that. Again, get in touch with us for anything you need. I believe that's all the questions, Sol, unless you've got anything else. Now there's a new message just come in. Shelley, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you everyone for your time. We've slightly gone over the allotment. A lot of good questions there. And if there's anything further, please get in touch with your advisor. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.